Our objective is to conduct a strictly operational sequence breakdown of the combat scenario documented as the last signal. To isolate the underlying military mechanics, we must strip away the emotional narrative of the source material. This animated diagram models the urban grid where the event occurred. The central blue NATO symbol represents the primary operator, ION. The defining characteristic of this engagement is operational compression. The operator is forced to transition from a static defensive posture to a high-stakes, danger-close strike against armor in a highly compressed timeframe. To understand how this happens, we divide the timeline into 4 distinct tactical phases. First, pre-contact. Second, kinetic escalation. Third, asset extraction. And finally, terminal area denial. Analyzing this specific timeline provides a model of how isolated units process complex asymmetric threats when operating under extreme time deficits. This reconstructs the environmental baseline of Phase 1. In this zero-illumination night operation, the only visibility comes from intermittent, distant, silent flashes of artillery fire. This intermittent lighting creates shifting microterrain advantages. Moving shadows constantly alter sightlines, creating brief windows of visibility and concealment for both the defending operator and the advancing forces. Just prior to contact, the operator's physiological baseline indicates high stress. Recorded parameters show heightened autonomic arousal, characterized by a significantly elevated heart rate. In an otherwise silent operational environment, these sharp physiological spikes often serve as a reliable predictive indicator that kinetic contact is imminent. Recognizing these baseline shifts in both the environment and the operator's biology is the first step in tracking the transition from a secure defensive perimeter to an active hot zone. Phase 2 begins. On this tactical map, the engagement timer counts up. An explosive detonation occurs, followed by inward-pushing small arms fire. Aerial reconnaissance confirms widespread engagement. Dispersed thermal anomaly zones populate the expanded grid. Outer boundary lines dissolve. The unit is now entirely isolated. This collapse creates an immediate operational requirement. The isolated unit must abandon its static defense and initiate dynamic maneuver protocols to avoid being pinned down. In compromised urban grid, stationary defense is no longer viable. Operators must prioritize mobility and rapid threat assessment to stay ahead of the closing perimeter. The timeline is further complicated when the operator deliberately breaks physical cover to intercept an unsecured civilian asset in the middle of a crossfire. To execute this, the operator conducts a dynamic threat assessment. This 3D geometry breakdown shows intersecting enemy lines of sight as red cones. To reach the unsecured asset, a calculated blue path utilizes gaps in visual coverage to minimize exposure before forces adjust. Post-retrieval, the tactical objective shifts to relocating the secured asset to a defilade position, a physical location that masks them from the primary axis of engagement. Introducing a non-combatant into the operational timeline severely restricts operator mobility. Because they must carry the asset, their sprint speed is reduced. Ability to return fire is limited, turning a standard maneuver into a high-risk extraction. Engagement parameters shift with the introduction of enemy mechanized elements. This thermal simulation tracks large, slow-moving heat signatures, enemy tanks, pushing systematically into the street layout. Mechanized armor changes the spatial geometry of the battlefield. It introduces heavy-caliber blast zones that can bypass standard infantry cover, like brick or concrete. Returning to the tactical map, we map the heavy red vectors of the advancing armor. The standard protocol is an immediate initiation of retrograde maneuvers. The dotted blue arrows show the path used to fall back and preserve the unit. The operator rejects this standard protocol, choosing instead to hold a static forward position directly in the path of the mechanized advance. When mechanized assets outpace localized infantry capabilities, defensive units may abandon survival protocols to ensure a specific tactical outcome, such as completing an extraction or securing a coordinate. After rejecting the retreat, the operator's first step is securing the civilian asset, in a location projected to be outside the primary blast radius of the mechanized threat. The operator then establishes a static observation post. This maintains a direct, uninterrupted line of sight on the incoming armor to provide accurate targeting data. This network diagram illustrates the kill chain initiation. Under extreme time compression, the operator activates terminal command via radio. A pulsing data line sends coordinates to C2. Command identifies them as danger close, flashing a red warning. The operator overrides, pushing final authorization to air support. Bypassing these safety safeguards enables immediate tactical resolution. In this scenario, the operator's survivability is traded for the immediate destruction of the advancing armor. Fast air assets arrive on the grid, delivering the requested heavy ordnance payload onto the operator's locked coordinates. This kinetic event functions as a mechanism of area denial. On the tactical map, an expanding red blast radius originates from the operator, engulfing the mechanized vectors. The diagram shows the civilian asset just outside this lethal radius, protected by a defilade structure. This terminal action stops the mechanical advance that standard small arms fire was incapable of halting. Area denial is the final resort to halt mechanized armor in a dense urban environment. It resets the battlefield state by neutralizing the immediate threat. By dawn, the post-engagement battlefield state shows a cessation of kinetic activity and the survival of the extracted civilian asset. The tactical trade-off involved the successful halting of a mechanized force through the deliberate attrition of the localized forward observer. The survival of the civilian asset validates the operator's high-risk timeline. The timing of the extraction and the coordinate lock were the decisive factors in the outcome. The last signal engagement illustrates the limits of asymmetric resource management, where an isolated unit must choose between preservation and objective completion. Maintaining decisive command and control under extreme duress remains a primary factor in modern urban warfare, even when the cost of that success is the operator themselves.